Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Simon Taylor, and welcome to episode 98 of the FinTech Insider Breakfast Show. As you know, in this show, we bring you the best advices from around the world of fintech and banking every single weekday, straight to your homes at 8:30 a.m. British summer time. And my goodness, what a British summer we're having. Apart from on Wednesdays, when Sam Moore goes live at 3:30 BST or 10:30 in the East Coast of the US. Both shows go live here on LinkedIn. Now, before I introduce this morning's guest, we are so excited to finally announce the next FinTech Insider After Dark, but with a 2020 twist. We've gone truly digital, of course we have, and we're hosting the entire edition online. We're bringing the full After Dark experience straight to your laptop, phone, or any other screen. You can stream it to your TV if you want, really make a party out of it. And no matter where you are in the world, you can tune into this live recording of our podcast and mingle with us after the show. To find out more, you can grab your place, visit bit.ly/digital after dark. Okay, today I am thrilled to be joined by Tim Harkness, who is author of 10 Rules for Talking. How's it going, Tim?
Yeah, good, thanks, Simon. Very nice to be here.
Really good to have you involved. Where are you joining us from today?
From my home in Fitcham, just south of London.
Not a million miles away then. I guess really nice background there. You've got sort of a little studio setup going on. I'm really digging that.
Yes, doubling is that.
Doubling is that. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do?
Well, my day job, I'm a sports scientist and psychologist. So I currently work in football, Chelsea Football Club. But I have multiple interests, particularly around the psychology side. And, you know, one of the big interests in terms of some of the work that I've done in the corporate sphere, some of the work that I've done with teams, became communication. And this is a world that I started to investigate probably 6-7 years ago. And the outcome of those investigations has been this book, 10 Rules for Talking.
Fantastic. Well, and I guess you've done some interesting things in your time. You studied baboons in the Drakensberg Mountains,
That's
is it?
correct, yes.
What did you learn from the baboons?
Well, you know, so the Drakensberg Mountains are a range of mountains that run down the from north to south in South Africa. And one of the things we're interested in, I mean, you know, you got me started on baboons here, is that in the Kruger National Park, baboons suffer from predation pressure. So there are lions and leopards that want to eat them. And they have been observed to have a particular social organization as a response to this predation pressure. So basically, the little ones stay on the inside of the group and the big guys stay on the outside of the group. And we were interested to have a look at the baboons in the Drakensberg because there are no lions and leopards in the Drakensberg. And what we found is that the group was highly organized still. But the reason for it was social pressure rather than predation pressure. And it was fascinating to just be part of a troop of baboons and really understand how many games they play also. Because baboon society is a hierarchical society, same as human society. There's reciprocity, there's fairness, and there are rules that govern this society, same as there are rules that govern our own societies. And it was really interesting to spend time with them and engage with a few of those rules.
I can imagine, and the pressures. If you change the external pressure, the way the group organizes is somewhat different. But there's still an organization, kind of regardless. And I guess there are similarities with humanity there. But I guess in the sports context, what you mentioned a couple of things there around sort of fairness and games and other sorts of things. Well, how do you see that play out day to day in different sports contexts?
Yeah, you know, in the sports context, I think so. One of the experiences I had, I worked for the Saudi Arabia national team in 2018 at the World Cup in Russia, and that was an interesting experience because you had quite a unified group of people. They all played in the same league in Saudi Arabia, but they'd never played outside the country. So they had this incredible experience of being a very united group of people, going right outside of their comfort zone and competing on the world stage. And that was this. And what we found is what they needed to do is they needed clear objectives. They needed to be told exactly what it was that they needed to do. Another experience that I had was I worked in the IPL. So, if you don't watch cricket, the IPL is the biggest cricket league in the world. What happens is for a period of around 2 months, you get the best cricketers from all over the world who never normally play in the same team. And you get players from the West Indies, from England, from Australia, New Zealand, and India, all suddenly thrown together. And they've been competitors their whole lives. And suddenly you have to create a unit out of this. And one of the things that struck me, and I was quite surprised by in the world of cricket, is that you can look at cricket and think it's an individual game. Nobody can help you bat, nobody can help you bowl. But the emotional support that they needed from each other was extremely high. And this was their number one priority, was how could they better emotionally support each other? This is a group of tough, young professional men, really curious about how to support each other emotionally.
It's interesting, in the last sort of 5 to 10 years, the relevant sort of importance, it appears, of psychology and sports science has really taken more of a front seat. And indeed, it's often talked about that it's key to the success of many of the successful teams that you see out of there.
Yeah.
Have you experienced that? And what do you think's been part of that transition and change? What's the insight that's led to that?
Yeah, I think, to me, so much of agreement is really making good decisions and making good judgments. So, when in my book I talk about kinds of conversations, sometimes we're just trying to understand the world. We're trying to evaluate the world in some way, and that should be a fairly objective process. Ideally, we're trying to scientifically come to some kind of conclusion. And there's a very well-established process for doing that. It's called the scientific method, and we can adapt that in our everyday lives. But sometimes we may have a fairness debate that we're trying to allocate some kind of resource. So, you and I have got a packet of biscuits, and we're trying to decide, how do we share out this packet of biscuits? And that's a little bit different from the scientific conversation, because we're not trying to objectively achieve some kind of truth. We're trying to both put forward a case for our own interests to be met. But whatever kind of conversation you're having, there are processes that can be followed, and those processes rely on information. And one of the developments in modern business, obviously, is data. And if we can process data correctly to give us the information that we need to make good decisions, then I find that the conversations are a lot more simple and a lot more cordial as a consequence of that. So one of the big things that I'm trying to do from the point of view, from the data point of view, is good people contextualized information. Now, I'll just take a moment to stress that point, contextualized, because one of the reasons why we're having so many arguments in the world today is that everybody's got information, but it's not contextualized information. So it's absolutely critical that when we compile business information, we're compiling in a way that embeds the information that people are seeing within the correct context.
So this could be, for example, let's take sports example, somebody that had historically been able to run a certain distance or cover a certain distance over a 90-minute period might be seen as a really good statistic, but actually for several weeks this seems to be down. But what we didn't know is that, oh wait, there was an underlying injury, and without that context, then it's very hard to see, why has this performance dropped? Do we need something else? And with a salesperson, perhaps they're particularly effective, but they've had a string of things where something changed inside the client, and without that context, it's less about the salesperson's performance and more about what happened at the client. And you have to see both sides of it. Like, could the salesperson have done more, but also what happened in the client? And you have to see both of those bits in order to make that decision. Just the data by itself is very, very simple. And
potentially dangerous.
I can imagine. Audience, speaking of conversation, do remember to send us your questions. Get them into us. Make sure that we're asking any questions about conversation to Tim. I'm really enjoying this, so I don't want to dominate it by any stretch. This show really is about all of you. I'm interested, Tim, you started talking there a little bit about the lessons we can take into business and contextualizing information. How have businesses done this well, and what can they learn from sports science in particular? I think a little bit around fairness and reward is kind of an interesting area to think about.
Yeah. So this is a future project of mine. Is if you go into Amazon and you search for books about fairness, there are hundreds of them, but they're all aimed at children. So it's kind of teaching, Johnny how not to steal from Betty. And then there's this kind of genre of either political theory or economics, which obviously also deals with social justice. But there are relatively few books just for ordinary people to try and make sense of their own personal lives or their professional lives. And there are a number of really interesting concepts that can kind of take you further into the world about fairness. But one of them is the idea that when it comes to fairness, sometimes fairness is about getting what we need. So in some organizations or some situations, it would not be fair to not get what you need. And if there are a group of us in a life raft and somebody fell overboard, it wouldn't be fair for us not to help that person back into the life raft. That's not equal treatment. That person is getting special treatment. It's not necessarily that they deserve to be helped back into the life raft. Maybe they possibly hadn't been helping us paddle, or maybe they had an extra sip of water or whatever, but they need to get back in the life raft, and it's fair to give people what they need. In other situations, it's fair that people get what they deserve. If you and I are spent the day painting a room, and you've done more painting than me, at the end of the day, when we share out the packet of biscuits, you should get more biscuits because you've done more work and you deserve more. And there are other situations where we all deserve to be treated equally. So when it comes to, for example, something like having air to breathe or having clean water to drink, it would be very difficult to argue that Jeff Bezos deserves more fresh air than I deserve or you deserve. No matter how much money you've got, no matter how hard you've worked, as human beings, we feel that there's certain things that we're all entitled to. And, the interesting part about this conversation, this is a fairness conversation. So this is a particular kind of conversation. Like I was saying, sometimes conversations are about trying to understand the world. Sometimes conversations about trying to predict the future, but this is a particular category of conversation, which is a fairness conversation.
I'm interested in how you define conversations and also the rules of talking within them. Is something you cover in your book?
Yes, for sure. Well, the 10 rules for talking, that was kind of the idea of the book, is that at certain times in certain conversations, we have to invoke particular rules. And I think what I was really trying to do with the book is there's some fantastic books on the process of talking. And in fact, just yesterday, I was talking to a police negotiator, and he said they get sent on a course and how to handle basically two kinds of situations. The one kind of situation that they end up in is a crisis situation where they end up talking to a person who is in a crisis. Maybe ended up, on the ledge of a building or on a bridge or something, and they need to talk to this person. And another kind of situation that they can end up in is a hostage situation. And both times they have a particular process that they have to follow. And there's some fantastic literature out there, books like Difficult Conversations, Crucial Conversations, Getting to Yes, real classics of the genre that outline the process by which we should follow conversations. But what I was really interested in my book is trying to talk about why it is sometimes difficult to follow that process. So, for example, we all know that we should listen, but why is it hard to listen sometimes? We all know that we should be logical, but why is it hard to be logical sometimes? So, that's really what I wanted to try and address, is the skills and the emotions that lie beneath the processes that actually we all understand. Because, that was another point of the book, is that most of the time talking is easy. Most of the time we can follow these rules.
Yeah.
But there's
But
certain
as a
times.
human, we might have an underlying state, an emotional state, and we can perform differently depending on that emotional state, or a
Absolutely.
myriad of other reasons potentially. That if we know those rules, it's in some contexts it's easy for us to use them, and in other contexts it can be quite difficult. I'm gonna move us to a question here from Dan Feeney, who asks, how is the ubiquitous digital medium changing the way people communicate? We're on Zoom more than ever before. Is this changing us? Are you seeing something like this?
Yeah. I think there are a couple of things. I actually went on a course myself of how to make digital meetings more interesting and engaging. And the point he made was the presenter said, you have to talk to the camera as if it is a dear friend that is slightly slow. And and he said everything's
just that remark.
He said everything's just got to be a little bit exaggerated. And the reason why is that we are losing information across this medium. That normally when we're face to face, we can see more of each other's bodies. We can have a better view of each other's facial expressions. We're actually getting a more complete audio experience also. So one of the and there's no lag. So we're getting instantaneous, exact feedback of micro expressions, which are telling us exactly the moment that I'm doing something that you're responding to. Whereas when there's a slight delay, when there's a slight video delay, I'm not quite sure exactly what it is that I'm doing that you're responding to. So we're losing a lot of information, and we're not necessarily aware that we're losing this information. So it is a slightly confusing experience, and we definitely have to work harder over a video link.
That's an interesting insight in that the video links for many can seem tiring, and it's almost like we're trying to process many different people that we would have had these micro communication sort of cues from before and taking them in. But I guess aside from the video changes as well, I'm wondering what other small changes people can make in their day-to-day lives just to improve how we communicate and interact with people, because I really like the video tips there. I think it plays to my natural sort of overly expressive self anyways.
Yes. You know, I'll get to the second question, but we had a pair of glasses that we used in the sports world which create a shutter effect, so you can sometimes have them go completely black. And what you do is you're cutting down on the amount of visual information that the athlete has access to. So when you're playing tennis, instead of seeing the ball moving towards you smoothly, it kind of jumps towards you. And it's incredibly hard because your brain is trying to fill in the gaps. And I think this is, in a way, what's happening over a video link is you're making do with less information and your brain is trying to fill in the gaps. And this is why it is so tiring, because you're doing all of that extra work. You're trying to join the dots in a way that you don't have to when you're having a normal face-to-face human conversation.
That's interesting. It's
a great
metaphor.
Yes, you know, so if you're feeling tired, you're not the only one, and there's a reason for it, which is that you're doing more work than you would normally have to do.
It's a great reason to go take a nap in the middle of the day.
Well, that's working from home. Oh yes,
that's working from home. But also outside of the digital context, are there other changes we should be making to improve everyday lives?
You know, so I think rule 4. So rule 4 is talk fast and slow. And those of you who've read Daniel Kahneman's book, Think Fast and Slow, will obviously recognize the idea that I've taken from that concept. And that is that. So what Daniel Kahneman is saying in his, incredible, important book, Think Fast and Slow, is that as human beings, we've got two sides to us. We've got this automatic, instinctive, creative, spontaneous side where we think quickly. And then we've got this deliberative, careful, methodical side where we think slowly. And he says these are two quite separate processes, and we switch between the one and the other. And really in rule 4, I take that idea and I say we shouldn't just think like this, we should talk like this also. So obviously a lot of the time we just want to talk fast. We just want to be creative. We want to be spontaneous. We just want to have fun. And fast talking works most of the time, but it doesn't work all of the time. And there are moments when we need to recognize this and we need to put on the brakes. And we need to say, no, hang on, let's stop talking fast. And I think if we look at where things are going politically, if we look at how conversations can end up on social media, that when conversations start to get fast, our impulse is to make them even faster. We want to reply more quickly. We want to have an even better zinger. But actually, we got to learn to put on the brakes and say, let's slow this down. Let's start thinking methodically. And that's what the 10 rules are about, is to give people some methodical processes that they can apply in different situations.
I love that metaphor. There's a great story, I think, from a book called The Decisive Moment by an author called Jonah Lehrer, who talks about a group of firemen who are facing a fire that is coming towards them, and behind them is a very steep hill. And a lot of them decide to run up the hill to run away from the fire. But the old fire chief realizes that he will never make it up there. His legs just won't carry him. So what he does is gets out his lighter and sets fire to the ground at his feet. He stands away from the fire, and he realizes that that fire will burn itself out because it doesn't have enough fuel. Stands in where the fire had just burned, and then the fire that comes towards him doesn't burn him. It just moves around him because it had no fuel. Of course, the fire then moved faster uphill than it did across flat land, and unfortunately, all of his colleagues were then killed in the fire. And that's a real example of thinking fast and slow, and we can apply that to talking too. I think that ability to switch between those is really, really hard, because 90% of the time, the other bit of your brain is much more effective at what it does every day. It's a really hard distinction. But I'm interested in some of the other key rules that are out there, because that's such a powerful one, I think, for people to learn when to use and when not to use. Are there others that really stood out to you?
Yeah, well, you know, the idea of the book is that conversations, first of all, have to be safe, and secondly, they have to be effective. So when I started to teach workshops on communication, I found that people very quickly learned how to make conversations safe. So safe conversations are about listening, about showing respect, about being aware of the needs of the other person. But what people were coming back to me and saying is that I've made this conversation safe, but I made the conversation safe at the expense of my own interests. So they've kind of sacrificed themselves and they've avoided an argument, but they haven't got what they wanted. And the problem is that unless a conversation is effective, it's not safe, because it's just going to come back. And it's no good if I've just gone into a conversation and I haven't got what I wanted, because those needs are not going to go away. So the other part of the book was really about how to have effective conversations. And there are a couple of particular rules there. Rule 7 is around use rigor. So rigor is about how to perceive the world accurately and scientifically. And what I'm really trying to do with rigor is I'm not trying to persuade you of my point of view. I'm trying to use a process that you and I both agree on so that we can both discover the truth. So really fundamentally, a conversation becomes something different. It's not about me trying to persuade you of what I believe, and it's not about you trying to persuade me of what you believe. It's about both of us aligning and working together like a couple of scientists collaborating to discover the truth. And the truth is what is persuasive.
And the process that you follow to get to that is scientific method, as you say. And
that's correct.
I'm really inspired by the guys over at Stripe.com and the Collison brothers. They talk a lot about rigor at Stripe, and they have a great metaphor, which is when you get art critics together, they talk about the meaning of the art. And when you get artists together, they talk about where to buy the cheapest turpentine. And there is an idea that sometimes the outcome and the outputs are very, very different to understanding the decisions that led to that, are actually these micro decisions that are agonized over, but that people see this beauty and this value when actually the artist is just seeing the day-to-day and the mundane. And actually that is a hard thing to align around sometimes and create what's next. So, Tim,
Yeah.
I'm really interested as we come towards the end of this conversation. Where do people find out more about the book, and if people want to find out more about what you're working on, what's coming next from you?
Yeah, well, I think in terms of the book, 10 Rules for Talking, it's available on Amazon. It's probably the best, or easiest way to get hold of it. In terms of what I'm working on, I don't have a massive social media presence. I have to say, it's more a kind of working on a book kind of thing. I am working on, like I said, on this project around social justice and fairness.
Okay.
But the book is really a precursor to that, because we have to have ways of talking before we can engage in this next topic around the specific fairness conversations that we have.
Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
About the
social justice aspect in particular.
Okay, yeah, well, I think so. Social justice are the processes by which we allocate the resources of society, and we allocate the costs of society. And what has happened, I mean, obviously this is something people have been debating since prehistoric times. How do we allocate what we produce in a society? And I think at this moment in time, in Western society, we're very individualistic in the way that we understand what it is that people should receive. And we've got a particular view of meritocracy as well, that we believe, by and large, that people do get what they deserve. And we believe that people have quite a high level of control over what it is that they get and what they do. And these are powerful assumptions that are quite prevalent and are not necessarily correct. And I think at this moment in time, people are starting to question some of those things. People are starting to go, hang on, am I really getting what I deserve here? Do I really deserve this? And I think some of the anger that sort of bubbles through society sometimes is not just a product of social media or of echo chambers. Sometimes some of that anger is actually real. That people are recognizing that the society is becoming more unequal, and that decisions around the climate or around race are being made that are not that seem to be troublesome.
It's interesting that the successful people tend to view their successes are a result of hard work, and the unsuccessful sort of view the world as massively unfair. But it is a
fundamental attribution error.
Yes, indeed. And I'm sure I would love to talk more about that, but we are at the top of the hour, and I'm sure as an audience you do have a day to get into. So I really do hope people check out the book, 10 Rules About Talking, available on Amazon now. But please do join us again next week, everybody, for some FinTech fun. From next week, we'll actually be doing 2 US shows. So on Monday at 3:30 British Summer Time, here's Sam Moore in conversation with Georgetown law professor Chris Brummer, and they'll be talking about FinTech's race problem. My goodness, we need to talk about that. All right, have a great day, everybody, and goodbye for now.